Today, we're talking about how everyday objects, everything from a simple piece of cloth to the stuff in your own closet, were turned into tools of power, resistance, and identity during the colonial era.
Seriously, just for a second, look down at the shirt you're wearing right now. Do you know where it came from? Who made it? We almost never think about it, but every single thing we own tells a story, and some of those stories have really deep and pretty complicated roots in our history.
So, let's start with a really basic idea. The things that make us who we are. Our possessions, they're way more than just stuff. They're a huge part of our identity. They tell people what groups we belong to, what we care about, and how we see our place in the world.
This quote really gets to the heart of it, doesn't it? It frames consumption not as some modern shopping habit, but as something fundamental to being human. The things we choose, or the things we're told to choose, they literally build our identity. They help us feel like we belong, but they also help us decide who doesn't belong.
And this is where it gets ugly. During the colonial era, this totally normal human thing, linking objects to who we are, was twisted and weaponized. It became a powerful tool for domination. It was a way to justify conquest by drawing this really clear and often completely made-up line between the civilized us and the savage them.
Let me give you a really specific example. When Europeans first got to the Americas, they zeroed in on what the indigenous people ate. They used their diet as proof that they were monsters, spreading these wild stories about cannibalism. By painting this picture of what the natives consumed, colonizers could define them as less than human. And that story was absolutely crucial. It made subjugating them seem not just okay, but natural.
But what happens when the tables are turned? What happens when the colonized take an object and turn it into a weapon of their own? Well, that brings us to the incredible story of khadi, a simple, homespun cloth that became the very fabric of resistance against an entire empire.
Okay, so this chart right here, it lays out the whole economic trap perfectly. The British would take cheap, raw cotton from India, ship it all the way to factories in Manchester, and then sell the expensive finished cloth back to the Indian people. It totally wrecked local textile industries. The response? The Swadeshi movement. It was this radical call to boycott British stuff and embrace self-sufficiency with their own homespun cloth, khadi.
So choosing to wear and spin khadi was a direct political statement. It was a masterclass in non-violent economic warfare. Every single thread that was spun was a tiny declaration of independence. It was a real, tangible way for millions of Indians to join the freedom struggle and take back their economic power.
And this quote from Gandhi, wow, it just captures his vision so powerfully. He didn't just see khadi as cloth. He saw it as the very center of a new, self-reliant India. It was the sun that could power countless village industries, breaking that cycle of colonial dependency from the ground up.
And this wasn't just some symbolic gesture, right? It was a highly organized national program. Gandhi himself led by example, spinning yarn every single day. He built institutions around it, creating associations and even making spinning a requirement for party members. He literally turned a cottage industry into a unified force for revolution.
Okay, now we're going to take a sharp turn. Let's look at a totally different experience, one defined not by having a powerful object, but by the complete and total absence of objects. We're talking about the Middle Passage, where erasing someone's material identity was a deliberate act of dehumanization.
This quote from a Dutch slave trader in the 17th century, it's just so blunt and chilling. Captives were stripped of everything. And this wasn't just about hygiene or looking for weapons. It was a systematic process of stripping away their individuality, their status, their culture, everything that connected them to their former life.
So what, if anything, actually made it across the Atlantic? The records show us it was next to nothing. The very few things captives might have, like some beads or pipes or drums for forced exercise, were usually given to them by the slavers. These weren't personal belongings. They were tools of control, meant to keep captives quiet and just physically fit enough to be sold. And here's what's so important to remember. While their entire physical, material world was just obliterated, the enslaved people carried with them the things that couldn't be taken away: their skills, their knowledge, their memories. They arrived in the Americas with empty hands, yes, but not with empty minds. And it was from those intangible things that new cultures would eventually be born.
So how does any of this connect back to us, right here, right now? Let's bring this all the way back home and look at the echoes of these colonial patterns in our own lives, maybe even in our own closets.
Look at the pattern here. It's
Honestly, it's pretty shocking when you see it laid out like this. The colonial model was all about extracting cheap resources from one part of the world to satisfy consumer demand in another. While today's global economy, especially in fast fashion, often runs on a disturbingly similar model, extracting cheap labor from those same post-colonial regions to feed our relentless hunger for cheap, mass-produced stuff.
This whole cultural dynamic actually has a name: Coca-colonization. It's this idea that the flood of Western consumer goods can literally drown out local traditions and products. It's a kind of cultural domination that's fought not with armies, but with brand names and shopping malls. And what you end up with is this toxic cycle. This endless loop of overconsumption doesn't just put pressure on cultures. It creates these deeply exploitative conditions for millions of workers. And it has absolutely devastating consequences for the environment, often in the very same parts of the world that were exploited under colonialism.
So we end up right back where we started, with your shirt. The history of our material world is so incredibly complex. It's a story of identity and power, of brutal oppression, but also of amazing resistance. So maybe the next time you buy something, anything, just take a moment to ask, what's the real story behind this object? What history is woven into its threads?